The Prime Minister gathering top team members in Montreal starting on Sunday for a cabinet meeting to outline the year ahead. And we're already getting some of the details about what to expect. Team Trudeau will hear from experts on key challenges that the government is facing: a housing crisis, an affordability crisis, and Canada-U.S. relations amid an election year in the United States. And of course, the soundtrack playing in the background here: terrible polling numbers for Trudeau himself and his government. Let's bring in our front bench on this Friday to dig into it all. Sabrina Grover was a federal Liberal candidate in the 2021 election. She's now principal at Shakti Strategies. Next up, Melanie Paradis was the communications director for former Conservative leader Erin O'Toole. Nowadays, she's the president of Texture Communications. Let's bring him in. Guratan Singh, former Ontario NDP MPP, nowadays vice president at Crestview Strategy, also the brother of federal NDP leader Jagmeet Singh. And in Ottawa, our very own senior digital parliamentary reporter right here at CTV News. There she is, Rachel Aiello. All right, let me start with you, Melanie Paradis, and this focus on housing and affordability, issues that have dominated the political debate over certainly the last year or so, and whether you think the Liberals still have runway to try and sway voters when it comes to their management, or, as some would say, mismanagement of those files.
Well, the one thing we know that the Liberals won't be talking about at their cabinet retreat next week is who's going to replace Justin Trudeau to run in the next election. That's really what the topic of conversation should be, but it won't. Instead, they're going to be talking about how to run on, frankly, a strategy that is never good in politics, which is depending on third-party organizations or things that are completely outside of your control, like in this case, the Bank of Canada, to reduce interest rates so that the economy gets back to a place where the average Canadian is feeling less pain and might be open to voting Liberal again. That's the strategy in a nutshell, and it's just not going to work for them. And so I hope that as they're preparing for a budget, likely in March, that this next cabinet meeting that they have, that they're coming up with way better ideas and ideally figuring out who among them is going to replace Trudeau.
Guratan Singh, to you, and how you think they try and change the narrative on this, that they are, you've heard it before, out of touch, out of steam, out of new ideas.
I think it's also beyond ideas. Like when you're in a crisis, you don't just keep on, it seems like every single week after week when you hold these segments or when the subject comes up, it's like, oh, they've hold this. It was, during their summer retreat and then during their fall retreat or during, whatever cabinet meetings are held. And it seems like they're always just presenting possible ideas instead of actually bringing in the action that's going to bring the necessary change to help people who are in a really desperate situation. When people cannot afford to have a roof over the head, they can't afford to put food on the table, they look at how their lifestyle has changed after 8 years of Justin Trudeau, and they realize that it has not been for the better. And for the Liberal government to continually just always be proposing, I think is problematic. They need to actually bring forth the change that will result in more affordable homes and more affordable groceries.
To you, Rachel Aiello, and Guratan raises a good point. There's a summer retreat, there's a fall retreat. Now we have a winter retreat in Montreal, cabinet meetings going on. Whether you think Canadians are paying attention to it all, what's at stake for the government here? What do you think?
I think what's at stake for the government is hitting the ground running. Heading into this 2024 parliamentary season, the stakes are incredibly high for the Liberals because of the narrative you alluded to, Todd, about their polling numbers and whether they are out of steam. I think this is going to be a crucial first step for them to show that they have new ideas, that they are heading into the House of Commons returning with tangible, changeable policies that they are going to execute on to do more than just talking about Canadians' economic woes, Canadians' affordability issues, Canadians' concerns about security, international affairs. They're really going to have to avoid what happened in Charlottetown during their last cabinet meeting, where they came out of it without really anything concrete, tangible, big announcements. I think we'll be looking to see if they're able to hit a message target and hit that ground running, showing that they took the time over the holidays to get re-energized and come back ready to show why they want to run again in 2025.
To Sabrina in Calgary, you're the Liberal with us here. So don't we already know what the priorities are? I mean, don't we know that there's a housing crisis and an affordability crisis? We need to get more shovels in the ground. More housing has to be built. We've got to bring more relief for Canadians who are struggling to pay their bills. Your read on this cabinet meeting in Montreal and what you're hoping to see?
I think that the Liberals really need to come out of this cabinet retreat being laser focused. I think that over the last couple of months, we've seen them try to kind of hone in their messaging. I think it's worked with some success, but I think that out of this retreat, they need to pick like 3 priorities. And in my opinion, I think that healthcare has to be one of those priorities. Healthcare is cracking in Ontario and Quebec, and other provinces aren't far behind. They need to think about how their budget priorities are going to align with those 3 priorities. So when we talk about immigration, when we talk about housing, when we talk about healthcare, what are going to be the budget allocations for that, and how is that going to play out regionally? And I think that they need to really think about the voters that they're going after, right? So there was polling that came out only like a week ago or 2 weeks ago that shows that they're losing women, that they're losing young people. And so what is the way that they can frame those issues for those voters in particular in order to get them back? I think in particular, they have to get into campaign mode. It's not just about selling kind of this government agenda and these government policies, but they need to start drawing the contrast with the Conservatives and showing exactly where the Conservatives would cut. And as you lead into budget, I think that's really important for them.
Yeah, back to you, Garrett. And inflation's still high. No Bank of Canada rate cuts coming anytime soon. Like it or not, people do blame the government in power for a lot of that. We're also talking about the issue of immigration. We were touching on it at the beginning of the show today. Students coming in from other countries. Do you think Canadians are starting to rethink this massive influx of newcomers and some of the consequences amid word that maybe the government will start to cut back on the number of student permits to come to Canada?
Well, like I said in our earlier segment last week when we discussed this subject as well, I'm very worried about international students, new Canadians in general. Like this, when you start blaming one segment of society or of those who live in Canada for the sole cause of potential woes, I think it does set a dangerous precedent. And I think beyond that, these institutions are in general, our social support systems, be it healthcare, be it housing, be it otherwise, they're crumbling because of lack of investment. And I think we need to look at it more holistically and say, how do we build a robust society? How do we build a robust country? And when people are in desperate situations, that's when they begin to blame or otherize marginalized communities. And I'm always very nervous about that. But to the earlier point as well, to what the Liberals need to do at this time, it's when I look at policies that they need to be fought for, like dental care. Dental care is now it's starting to roll out, and by the end of the mandate, we're going to see millions of people having access to dental care. That's going to be a tangible difference in people's lives that impacts affordability, impacts healthcare, impacts a variety of indicators of socioeconomic and physical health. So when we look at housing, the government needs to start thinking about what policies can they implement now to make people's lives better now. And when they keep on just proposing idea after idea, I think people either stop paying attention or stop caring. Because until the standard of their life increases, it has no real bearing upon their life.
To Melanie Paradis, that's the real danger here, that people stop paying attention and stop caring, as Garatin is saying here. Do you think the behind closed doors conversations are kind of panic mode now?
They must be. They absolutely must be. I agree with Garatin that I think that unless there are tangible things that are happening to impact people's lives right away, that they're just losing the narrative. If it takes too long, if people are waiting 6 months, a year to see relief, it's just not going to impact the polling at all. It's not going to impact their opinion of the Liberals. And so I think that this cabinet meeting, this retreat, they're really going to be focusing on what can we do right now in order to have an impact.
Yeah, and how much of the sort of sense out there, Rachel Aiello, do you think is kind of percolating into some of those inner conversations that are happening with Team Trudeau? You know, the mood out there with Canadian voters. They always say, polls are one thing, but we're focused on governing. We know that, with all due respect, that's not completely true. They do look at the polls. They've got to know.
I think it is a balancing act for them, Todd, right now of doing, like the other panelists have suggested, finding those immediate action items, but also taking some time to consider what the Prime Minister's legacy would be should this be his last run in office. They have to be thinking about making sure that they're cementing some of those more long-term commitments, those legacy items that the Liberals came to power in 2015 talking about that still haven't been fully executed. So it's a two-pronged challenge, I think, for the Liberals heading into this parliamentary sitting. It's finding ways, and in some ways working working with the NDP to cement some of these bigger pieces, while also trying to fight off the day-to-day cut and thrust of the heated political conversation and finding elements of announcements they can make to kind of run the agenda and not constantly, like it was in the fall, seem like they were responding to calls to act from other parties.
We only got about 30 seconds, but back to you, Sabrina Grover. Your read on whether there will be any conversations either with Trudeau in the room or in some of those hallways about whether, as Rachel's pointing out, this should be the last time for him, that they need to pick somebody new, or do you think that's wishful thinking?
I don't think they're going to focus on that, honestly, going into this cabinet retreat and coming out of it. I think they're really just going to focus on those priorities that they have for policy and the ways that they're going to make or continue to make life more affordable for Canadians. And I think as they should be, right? They're still government, they're still governing, and they have to deal with the day-to-day realities of what Canadians are facing. And I think that that's the most important thing. I think they need to get into campaign mode and think about that longer narrative. But at the end of the day, thinking about a leadership is just a distraction for them right now.